Greetings, friends, viewers. Thank you for being with us for another episode, our 20th episode of the No Fly Zone podcast. I'm joined by K-Cloud's A-aron, and I'm your host, Bret the Vet. We are here to kind of do about a serial killer not all you may know about. It's kind of dark, but this is down K-Cloud's alley. K-Cloud, can you tell us a little bit about this and what we have coming up?
All right, we are here to talk about the serial killer you're either obsessed with or have never heard of once in your life. His name is Israel Keyes. He was operating from about the years, I want to say 2001 to 2012 in the United States. That was a very strange noise. I didn't make that noise.
That wasn't me.
And
that was out the street.
I outdid myself on this outline, as I do. My hyperfixation
52 pages.
Yeah.
52-page outline.
Kick ass.
It's a banger, man. This is definitely going to be more than one part. Whether we can get it into two parts or not, let's find out tonight. We are going to talk about this guy. I have consumed FBI files, interviews, hours and hours of interviews, podcasts, and novels about this guy. And I am ready to spill my short-term memory onto you, our faithful, lovely, beautiful, better than most listeners.
I can agree with that.
Cool.
Yeah. But if you listen to us, you have good taste. I can't help it. So,
and then YouTube's been blowing up too. I've been getting some comments and a lot of viewers. It's like growing more than Spotify right now.
My least favorite episode, the Flat Earth episode that I had to get drunk to make it through, is already stirring up controversy over there on YouTube. So go check it out. Maybe jump in and troll some Flat Earthers because they are out, man. They are louder than you. So Globers, go do your thing. We have episodes coming up, which we have talked about. We are going to attempt to make a tentative timeline of possibly a Bermuda Triangle episode. We're going to talk about some Titanic conspiracies. And one that has been heavily requested by at least two people, not to mention, their close friends, but whatever. The Dyatlov Pass incident, which if you don't know about it, stay tuned. It's going to blow your little mind. And now we are going to, first of all, welcome back, A-aron, our third podcast host.
Hey, guys.
He's here. He's back. We can't get rid of him. He's like,
No.
herpes or something, but we love him anyways.
Thanks, herpes. That's a great
he's like our
comparison. I appreciate that.
Emotional support companion.
No, stoked to be back. Thank you.
Lovely third voice and common ground between, we were talking about this before the show started, but we got Bret, who is straight up blitzed in outer space, floating and wondering about aliens and shit. And then me, the hardened detective on her third divorce with a cigar between her teeth on the crime scene. And then we've got A-aron, who is blessedly moderate. My God. Thank you for your service, sir.
Of course. Anytime.
Alrighty. Let's start talking about this fucker, Israel Keyes. Never heard of him? You're going to hear way more than you expected today. Family man by day, killer by literally every moment he was away from his girlfriend and daughter. Israel Keyes has emerged over the past decade as possibly the most meticulous serial killer ever unmasked. And to put that in context, I still personally do not believe he was that meticulous, but we'll get into that. Confessed serial killer Israel Keyes was a murder addict who found great enjoyment in taking people's lives, say the police. And here's a quote: Israel Keyes didn't kidnap and kill people because he was crazy. He didn't kidnap and kill people because his deity told him to or because he had a bad childhood. Israel Keyes did this because he got an immense amount of enjoyment out of it, much like an addict gets an immense amount of enjoyment out of drugs, said Anchorage, Alaska Police Detective Monique Dahl at a news briefing. He was addicted to the feeling he got when he was doing this, addicted to the feel of the hunt and of killing. And from that lovely little tidbit, we'll get into the early years. I'll let Bret take it away.
And I like the way you did this outline because, like, you went through a lot of material and resources for this. I've listened to a bunch as well, not as many as you, not quite as in depth as you, but all of them seem to start later on in his life. On one of the crimes that we're going to confess, but I like that you're starting kind of at the beginning or the origin story on Israel.
I feel like this sets the ground for a lot of the questions people have about him as far as his psychology, which I do have some theories. We'll definitely touch on that later. But people get so mystified and unfortunately enamored by this guy. I don't think he was either that smart or that cunning or that fantastic. But that's just information overload. And I'm going to let Bret talk about his family and how he grew up.
So for Israel Keyes' family, from what we know, Keyes was born in Cove, Utah on January 7th, 1978. He's the second of 10 children born to Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes, a couple who didn't believe in government interference, public schools, or modern medicine. Keyes was a toddler when his family left Utah for Colville, Washington. They lived an isolated existence in the woods where Keyes grew up without heat or electricity, so roughing it. While in Washington, Keyes' parents left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and became fundamentalist Christians and joined a white supremacist church. In the late 90s, the family relocated to Maupin, Oregon. They next moved across the country, staying close to an Amish community in Maine. So they're going from like coast to coast here.
Well, from what I understand, they were a little bit of like cult hoppers. They would literally meet street preachers and get sucked into their cults like instantly, and then become kind of disillusioned with that cult and hop to the next one very quickly.
Outcast, I want to belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a Reddit user wrote, "Little Israel, essentially reared to be the little man of the house, chopping firewood and hunting for the family. His parents had no shelter for the first 7 years of his life, besides a tent that they stayed in. When his father was not hunting and chopping wood, he spent much of his days shouting out prayers in the woods by himself. When he was 7, a cabin devoid of electricity or running water was made for the family to stay in. Needless to say, Israel was not very sociable, and his reputation grew worse as he committed more and more antisocial acts. Allegedly, Israel, his sister America, his friend and her sister were in the woods one day when Israel decided to shoot a cat in its belly. The cat's guts poured out as Israel chuckled. His friend was, quote, traumatized, and the sisters distraught. He would be mostly shunned by his peers thereafter, stating that it was the last time anyone ever went to the woods with him. He would also get in trouble again for breaking and entering, stealing his neighbor's guns, and storing it in a hidden cache, which his parents found." So he didn't have a lot to do and not that much supervision, it looks like.
So again, there's so much detail that's in my head that I didn't fit into this outline. But to detail and flesh this out a little bit more, Israel's father worked in construction. So he was basically making money by building other people's houses while his own family had no house. They lived in tents and in their car. And so they were watching this man slowly over years and years single-handedly build by hand a cabin for them to live in, refusing all offers of help to do so. And he was building houses for other people while they had nowhere to live. So he already had a weird, just those first few years. Plus then listening to his interview of him talk about the situation where he killed the cat. He's literally talking about, like, chuckling and talking about this. And he's like, I didn't see anything weird about it. But then I looked over at my friend that I brought with me and he was throwing up. And then I guess he told my parents, and then nobody went into the woods with me anymore. Like, it's just so, like, blasé about it. It's wild.
Well, yeah, that would change anybody's perspective, especially at that age. My friend killed a cat at that age. I'd be like, yo, dude, thanks. I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's child.
Yeah, and it's funny because he had one sister that would go and do these things with him, and she was shunned by him because she always tattled to his parents about his criminal activity. Like, it's like, I like hanging out with her. She liked to do the same stuff as me, like shooting at the neighbors' houses and shit. But then, she talked too much, so I couldn't take her with me anymore. Like,
well, yeah, that's like mob rule number 1. Like don't let the rat hang out with you.
No snitches. No shit, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're fun, but you talk too much. You gotta go.
Yeah. What is it? Snitches get stitches, I believe is the last I heard.
Exactly.
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah.
And that goes into growing up consistently. Keyes would break into neighbors' homes to steal guns, again, often with his sister. One of their techniques was they would take their BB guns out, shoot at the neighbors' houses, and if nobody came out, to like yell at them and chase them off. Then they would go in and burglarize the house. So he loved hunting. He would pursue, by his own words, anything with a heartbeat, and torture animals, again, behavior that has been linked to psychopathy. And he, obviously, as we've talked about, became increasingly ostracized from the other children in his community. People felt uncomfortable around him, and he only made that discomfort worse by his acts of criminal activity and the animal abuse and torture. While in custody, Keyes himself said, "I've known since I was 14 that there were things that I thought were normal and that were okay that nobody else seemed to think were normal and okay." Living under a strictly religious roof, Keyes felt oppressed by all the things he was forbidden from doing, including playing music or watching movies. During his adolescence, Keyes renounced his Christian faith and actually began to take an interest in Satanism, less because of belief and more because of rebellion. And after a teenage, Keyes told his family he no longer shared their faith. His father cut ties completely, though Israel remained close to his mother, close as a psychopath can be to anyone. And we're going to talk about some interesting childhood friends of Keyes. These guys could easily be their own episode, but I did try to condense. Aaron, you want to take this one?
Sure. Let's get into that. What is it? Cheyenne and Chevy?
And Chevy.
Shane and Chevy. Sorry, they spelled their names very different
fucking weird
than Shane.
Weird
But, okay.
spelling.
All right, let's check this out. Israel Keyes was a childhood friend and neighbor in Stephen County, Washington, of terrorists, Chevy and Cheyenne Kehoe. Shane, is that what it is?
Shane Kehoe, Shane.
Man,
it's a weird
it's
For
terrible.
those confused, they probably had Chevy first. It's spelled like Chevy. With I-E.
Yeah.
And Shane is spelled Cheyne. So fucking extra white people, man.
My English mind goes into a different pronunciation. Okay.
I know.
So, two racist brothers now serving lengthy prison sentence for murder and attempted murder. While only a boy of 12, Chevy heard about the exploits of Bob Mathis, a self-styled white revolutionary who tried to live out a novel's vision of race war and died in a fiery shootout with the FBI in '84. Today, court documents on file in 3 states, Ohio, Washington, and Arkansas, claim that Kehoe was grimly successful in achieving his life's dream of following in the footsteps of Matthews and becoming a blood-drenched Aryan warrior. He is tied to more acts of domestic terrorism than any other right-wing extremist arrested in the United States in the last decade. That says a lot.
I know.
That says a lot. As the alleged founder and leader of the so-called Aryan People's Republic, he is accused of involvement in 5 murders, the attempted murder of several police officers, bomb making, armed robberies, burglaries, and selling stolen property. Among other attacks, he initially pipe-bombed City Hall in Spokane, Washington. Jesus. Kehoe's plan, as far-fetched as it may sound to many, was to carve out a new independent country in the United States that would limit citizenships to whites. All others were faced to forcible deportation or death. Kehoe's alleged violence was truly grotesque. Among other things, Kehoe is accused of masterminding 3 Arkansas murders, including the torture and murder of an 8-year-old girl and her step-parents. They later got wrapped up with Timothy McVeigh, for those of you out there. Another one for you. Planned to murder their own family members and engage in a shootout with Ohio law enforcement before finally being apprehended. So these people are there. Yeah.
That is a glaze of that story. It's such a glaze of that story. There's so much, especially the horrible crimes they committed in Arkansas, which we're not going to get into. He
started an Aryan race thing. That's just that's crazy shit.
You know what that last paragraph reminds me of? I just see the closing or the end of the movie of Devil's Rejects when Freebird's playing and they're getting on the shootout on the freeway. Do you remember that? That's literally what that reminds me of.
Yeah. So the briefly mentioned, he literally tortured an 8-year-old girl to death in front of her father as payback against the father for perceived wrongs. The fuck. And the reason that we put this in here is because these were Israel's childhood friends, keep in mind. So how much they fed off of one another and maybe guided each other down this path. It's just wild that they both ended up becoming crazy notorious.
Well, these two are very extreme, too, compared to the things that we'll get into of Keyes. They're super extreme.
And this is a difference in mindset or psychology between the two, I believe, because Keyes didn't have strong enough beliefs to go the route that these two went. These two went kind of, fucking hard in the paint for the white supremacy movement that they were exposed to at a young age, whereas Israel completely eschewed that. But yeah, go ahead, Aaron, sorry.
No, apology. I just didn't know if I should keep going. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, these guys are super extreme. Okay. Excuse me. Israel Keyes is believed to have been one of two teenage boys in the Keyes family who showed up along with Chevy and Shane at the 92 rally at Fort Colville Grange, where human rights activists were attempting to organize and counter a growing number of racists and neo-Nazis in Stevens County. The source told Hate Watch. The two families, that Keyes and the Kehoes, were neighbors and friends and lived about half a mile apart off Aladdin Road north of Colville in Stevens County, Washington. A source with a direct knowledge of that situation said. The kids in both families were homeschooled. They were sometimes attended a Christian identity church called the Ark, just up the road from their homes, the sources also say. The Ark, by the way, is crazy as fuck. The Ark, headed by 83-year-old pastor Dan Henry, preaches that white people are the superior chosen race and that the Bible is their story. Identifying followers generally believe that modern-day Jews are not the real descendants of the Hebrews of the Bible, and many say that the Jews are biologically descended from Satan. Identity believers often describe themselves as the true Israel, suggesting the Keyes' first name is reference to his family. Crazy shit. That Ark, I did some research on that Ark before this, just because that thing was crazy, like in itself, let alone what they went through.
Absolutely nuts. And I debated how much of that information to put in here because, as we'll find out later, I ended up just glazing over it as well because Israel does completely cast that off in later years to the point where it seems that some of his life choices are in fact made specifically to counter those beliefs, to include his dating choices, his joining the military, brands and tattoos and things. Like he went as far away from this as he possibly could. So it seems clear that while it clearly did influence him because it's still in your head if you're still making choices, even to polarize against those beliefs, it didn't shape his actual ideology. I don't believe he really had an ideology, but we'll get into that.
But in the sense,
so let's talk about his.
I was going to say real quick on your statement. It kind of did. If you really look at it, it just sensed it opposite. Like he went against all of that stuff.
It was like a magnet. It was instead of attracting, it repelled.
It's like, I see this. No, I'm going to go here. I'm going to do the opposite of that. Yeah. So
he received it in such a concentrated format that he just wanted to go the opposite way. It was just so pungent that he just.
Oh, and I don't blame him.
Absolutely.
If you look into the Ark, everybody out there, if you look into the Ark, that's some crazy shit.
I will take the military service part because it was a patchwork of things and very difficult to dig up. Again, there are certain points that I, while researching this story, really, really wanted to dig into, and the difficulty of those things, as I've mentioned before, made it all the more alluring to me. His military service is one of those things that's patched together primarily through the FBI interviews and documents which I was able to read, heavily redacted, which are interviews of people who knew Israel during his stint in the military. So he served in the U.S. Army.
Yeah, I was just looking at his age. I was looking at his age for when he joined. He was 20 years old when he went into the service.
Yep. From
so
98 through 2001.
Okay.
I believe that he had some, again, I did not put this in here, but some little Easter eggs are going to get pulled out of my head today. He had a quote unquote situation with his boss's daughter that he was dating her or interested in her. And eventually, at this time, he was still entrenched in this church and all that. He confessed that he was thinking impure thoughts about his own girlfriend and therefore confessed, I believe, to his father, who got really angry with him and forbid him from even seeing this girl who they were not having sex. They were just talking, basically. And he was still wrapped up with her and became mad at his father because of not allowing him to see her, and that was part of his rebellion thing, was fuck you, I'm gonna go join the army. So that's a little tidbit that's in there that isn't really mentioned in a lot of places, but there was a girl. There's always a girl involved.
Always
So
a girl involved.
throughout this time, Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, and then he was also in Egypt. Where's my freaking phone? There's other places that he was, actually, but we'll get to that later. So, according to his military records, Keyes entered the Army in Albany, New York on July 9th of 98 and was discharged from Fort Lewis July 8th of 01 at the rank of E4. Records indicate Keyes was awarded the following decorations and awards, which is Army Achievement Medal, Army Service Ribbon, Marksman Badge with Rifle Bar, Expert Infantryman Badge, Air Assault Badge. Specifically, he served in the 5th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division. And now we're going to get into some of the juicy tidbits I found out about his military service.
Quick question.
So, the FBI... Go ahead.
Okay. This is more toward Bret. Bret, the service stuff that he got, the awards and stuff, on that level, like if you look at those awards, you know a lot more about those. Could you explain that to me as far as, are those important medals? I noticed he also only did 3 years. Would there be a reason for that as well? Isn't it 4? I'm not military. I figured I'd bring that to you.
That could be his initial enlistment was 3 years, and then he finish out the rest of it as an active reserve. Like if World War III kicks off, you get called back. Okay. But out of his awards, like the Marksman Badge, like you have to qualify to stay in. He was infantry. Air assault is really just tying cargo to helicopters. So that's basically means you have to train for that. The one award that he has as an E4 that's really good is the Expert Infantry Badge. That one, they have to go through multiple stations where you're timed. You have to do a bunch of different weapon systems. You have to complete a ruck march within a certain amount of time. Like it's pretty grueling experience to get that badge. So you had to be really physically fit. You had to know your job. You needed to know be a thorough soldier in your profession. So for him being an E4, he was set up to continue his career, go move up to sergeant, or if he wanted to.
So basically, what I'm asking out of all this.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Basically, what I'm asking out of this is he did good in the military, right? That's what all that is. That's good stuff, right? Hey, good job.
Yeah, that's great. Especially 11 Bravo to have an Expert Infantry Badge, EIB. That's great.
That's impressive stuff. Okay.
Yeah, he had no issues really in the military. There's some small things that I'll talk about here in a minute, stories from fellow soldiers. But as far as official disciplinary action, the worst official problem, quote unquote, in his entire life was a DUI he received while in the military, which isn't even on his official criminal record. It was just by his own admission that he received a DUI while in the military. Again, not on his record. So,
I was going to say, did they actually find any proof of that, or did the military just go, hey, cool, we got this?
I don't think they tried very hard.
Okay.
Don't know. He claimed that he had a DUI in the military. Most of his comments like that did end up checking out, so it's difficult to... he didn't have... How am I going to say this? While I would never suggest that one trust a serial killer, both his motivation and the details of his interviews tended to pan out more often than not. So, unknown. I don't believe that they tried very hard to find out about the DUI. If they did, I did not read about it. But he did claim in an interview that he had a DUI. But then at other times, when the police first contacted him, he had a squeaky clean criminal record. Interesting.
Well, and that's why I brought that up. He
also admitted to serving time on the... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's why I brought that up because as you progress through your outline, I'm sorry, it showed that he was a progressively great soldier. He listened, he did what he was supposed to do, and that goes more into future things that you're going to bring up. But just to kind of clarify, because those awards, I wasn't sure. I knew Bret would know, hey, this is how much it takes to get this award, or this is a jack-off award that the military gives you because you showed up. That's kind of what I wanted to.
The only one on there that I'm impressed by is the EIB, because not the Expert Infantry Badge, because there's a lot of infantry guys that don't even get that or pass it, because you're literally timed on everything, and you only get 1 to 2 chances to do it. For different weapon stations, all kinds of things. You got to be an expert at your job to get it.
Then that badge is showing again down the road efficiency in certain things, maybe kind of why he was good at what he was good at.
Following a process, following a routine. So,
okay. Well, cool.
I will say that although it wasn't
Thanks,
listed, he apparently served time in Panama as well as the Saudi-Israeli border at some point, although that wasn't listed before. It's just interesting as I pick things up later. I can make little notes to add them in. But
here's the weird thing is, out of his badges, you're saying he's overseas. A lot of times you get an OSR or overseas service ribbon, and so I don't see
He
that
did
he had
serve
overseas service
overseas.
ribbon.
he spent
Well,
quite a bit of
or
time in
did-
Egypt, actually.
But
I
I'm
did
saying
read-
in the list of his awards, I don't see it.
I know.
So I'm just saying I don't know
Well,
if that means anything or not. But
That's from Wikipedia, so, take it with a grain of salt,
Yes.
buddy.
Oh, that's funny.
That portion is from Wikipedia because it's so hard to find this information, specifically about his military service time. A lot of it, again, as you did pick up on this, but he had almost no problems in the military besides just, some infantry stuff, like drinking a lot and trying some drugs. And you know what I mean? But again, nobody seemed to think this was out of place.
And
Right.
I'm probably going to piss some people off saying this, but it's true, is that infantry is the most basic position to get in the military. The lowest scores on the ASVAB test, I think you only need like a 13 out of 100 to qualify for the infantry. And infant, which goes back to the foot soldier, infant, child, the infantry, they're bullet catchers. Like, I was recon, so we let the bullet catchers know where to go. So, I mean, you
Sound a
didn't
little
have to
salty,
have...
Bret.
No. It's what I'm saying is that sometimes, like, you have some really good guys in there and some high intelligence guys, but a lot of times you get bottom of the barrel guys or guys that had a choice, especially the time he went in, like with judges of going to prison or going into the military or didn't have a good education. So yeah, what's what you got, Aaron?
Yeah, I was going to say, however, even though, like, I totally understand where you're coming from, they still receive training that would have focused, say, somebody who was crazy and liked to kill cats. Like, that training still exists, right? Like, he would have learned to be a better killer in the military. Not saying anything. That's what the military teaches the military people,
yeah.
right? I'm an outside guy, not in the military.
Especially
but
infantry,
to me,
is combat
that's-
terms.
Yeah, so he's learned, like, hey, I'm going to learn combat training.
That's hand grenades, that's bayonet courses, that's marksmanship, all different weapon systems. That's probably doing combatives, like all kinds of things.
So the
and
military
even
could
going
have
through battle drills, room clearing, things like that.
they could have easily made him a better killer, basically, is what I'm putting on the table. Okay, cool. That's
Absolutely.
what I'm going with it.
There's a lot of comments like that across the internet without them even realizing. I mean, even finding out his fucking MOS in the military was difficult. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what his fellow soldiers had to say about him. They're conflicting because some people said, he was a soldier. He was a soldier. He existed. And then others were like, my God, he was a super soldier. This motherfucker never got tired. He was like 6'3", 6'4", 230 pounds, pure muscle, athlete of the world.
Wow.
Did they say that about McVeigh too? Like Timothy McVeigh, like he had like
I'm not
they said
sure.
like if I had a whole bunch of them, like he would annoy the shit out of people, but like as a soldier was really good.
Apparently, there was some kind of pre-training, special forces like pre-screening or something, and by all accounts, he quote unquote flew through it. Though obviously, he chose not to pursue that path. But
Selection.
so I believe that he flew through that is what his fellow soldiers say. Like it didn't even faze him or like it didn't bother him. They were just like all really stunned by his ability to physically get through that without seeming affected.
He grew up in the woods in a tent. Like,
Right.
No heat,
So-
no electricity.
When it comes down to what his fellow soldiers knew about him, they knew that he had a tumultuous family history, had possibly been raised Amish or in some highly religious like commune as they described it, and many believe, though Keyes never explicitly said this or even talked about it, that his father had been heavily abusive to Keyes and his siblings. Apparently at some point he overshared or something because some of his soldiers would make fun of him because he liked to torture cats when he was a kid. So somehow they found out about that. So Israel Keyes later told investigators that, quote, I didn't do anything drastic until after that, meaning being in the military, but he eventually confessed he committed his first crime in 1998, which is shortly after he enlisted in the U.S. Army. So the details of that first crime are unclear, but people who serve with Keyes remembered him, again, as often drunk and withdrawn throughout his service. The only admitted criminal activity during this time was a DUI, which for some reason didn't even come up when they first met him and ran a background check.
the withdrawn and drunk, like that's just combat arms. Like it's party hard.
Yeah.
Like when you're stateside, you're shit faced, and then because you don't know if you're coming back for your next deployment.
And nobody, let me make this clear. None of his buddies who even made those comments thought that was odd behavior in the slightest. Not for him, not for infantrymen, not for their duty station, nothing. So they said, no, he was pretty normal, and they described, oh yeah, he was doing coke and drinking and all this stuff, but yeah, he was normal. Like,
You're
all of
worried
that
if you
was...
don't participate.
Right. So one guy was named Sean McGuire, who shared a barracks with Keyes. He said they developed a camaraderie while spending some time together doing a grueling training in Egypt. But he says he was disturbed by a dark side that sometimes surfaced. When Keyes was offended by his buddy's comments, he'd drop his head, McGuire recalls, knit his brow, lower his voice, and say, "I want to kill you, McGuire." So
fun.
it goes on, shit that happened in Egypt. While drunk with his buddies in Egypt, Keyes also branded his neck, or had them brand his neck, with a pentagram, possibly as kind of a fuck you to his religious upbringing. And later on, it was discovered he also had the anarchist A symbol and an upside-down cross branded on his chest, which he told investigators he did himself. He had one very close friend while in the military. I'm not sure his name. Very difficult to find this information. And everyone would joke about, oh yeah, those two guys were probably boyfriends. But nobody actually thought that they were homosexual. They just would make the joke because they were like peas in a pod.
You can ask Ryan about this. It's called your battle buddy.
Right. And the gayest people I know in my entire life, to include my gay best friend, are straight military guys. I've never met anyone who's gayer with each other than straight ex-military men.
Yeah, you should call it heterosexual
so I want to talk about
life partner. Heterosexual life partner would be
right.
the call for that. Because battle buddy sounds gay. Yeah,
my two of my best friends got drunk, and I don't remember. We were at my buddy's house. My two buddies were drunk, both of them very, very straight, and they walked around for like 2 hours on a bet with their hands in each other's butt pockets, drinking, like just like glued to each other's hips, just like gay as balls, but like they're the straightest guys I know. I'm like okay, guys, whatever. This is your thing. I know. And one of them was Ryan, by the way. Yeah, it was Ryan and my buddy Mitch. I have pictures of this. It was great. But I want to talk about two outbursts of violence, which were recalled the only time in his entire military career, I guess, if 3 years is a career, that there was like a long ruck. And apparently there's some super heavy piece of equipment that weighs like 100 or something like 70 to 100 pounds that they had to take with them. And this was given by the commanding officer to Keyes to be carried. So this guy, Keyes, was himself carrying now about 130 pounds on this like 13-mile ruck. And I guess at the end of the ruck, he got really pissed off about this and like threw the thing down and stormed off. It was like some kind of plate setup. I don't know. And then the other, so that was one quote unquote outburst of violence because like none of us have ever gotten mad about anything. The other was something they called paybacks, which is basically you have a problem with another soldier, you get in a circle and everyone gets in a circle around you and you guys duke it out. So another soldier had a problem with Keyes. They got into.
Are you describing like an Oklahoma drill, KC?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay,
but they call
they do. So every unit platoon's a little different, or have different rites of passages or ways that they do things. Like we'd have certain things like if you got promoted, everybody that outranked you would be able to punch you in the chest. That's a congratulations on your new rank. There's just different things, but that might be for his. I was in 25th Infantry Division. I mean, that might be something they do. But yeah, guys would definitely players sometimes. Guys would go at it.
Yeah, it doesn't sound realistic. Like that does happen in the military. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Some ways that happens with cops too. Like.
Really?
It's one of those like you would never tell the fucking feds about it. Like
it's always worse. Like for instance, like my drill sergeants going through basic training. Drill sergeants had it worse when they were in. I had it worse in the the generation of soldiers that were under me once I was an NCO. Then now the soldiers have stress cards. If they're getting yelled at. So like each generation's gotten softer, or the previous one had it worse. Is what I'm getting to.
And now, being 10 years into my career, I'm embarrassed by the softness of the training that these recruits go through and how we're not allowed to yell at them or haze them or, like, chew them out. Like, it's wild. It's embarrassing. For the careers that we're in, the fact that we can't use mean words because it might hurt your feelings. Like, do you think, like, Betty Meth Head is not going to cuss you out on the street and hurt your little feelings? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's just wild to me how much things have, and I never thought I'd be the person to say, oh, back in my day, but now I do say that because,
yes,
I guess we were still allowed to be smoked to fucking high heaven because one person, literally, like, when I was in police academy, they would do like the military style lineups and shit. If one goddamn person had like one tiny bit of contraband on them, I'm talking a live round or a fucking pen or some crazy tiny thing, we would get smoked for like 2 hours. All of us would. And we just expected that. And we knew it was going to happen. And we weren't going to talk to that guy for the rest of the day. Like, and now, of course, they don't do any of that. I'm just like, you got to be shitting me. Like,
so the training's gotten
like
softer over the years, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So much softer. Wild. Like, I don't want to get on my soapbox with that, but it was, when I went through police academy, it was softer than I expected it to be. I was prepared for fucking like crazy psycho G.I. Joe, boot camp bullshit. And there was some of that, but not nearly as much as I expected. And now there's like none of that. Like, as hard as I expected it to be, and it wasn't. Now it's like Charmin Ultra Soft. I just can't.
Gotcha.
Again, so I'm not saying people should be tortured. I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, like, so if you look,
you
at
need to be
reference,
trained for your job. Like,
in the time frame that Keys was in the military, it would have been a lot harder than the now, right? Like, they really would have pushed you. That would have been Bret.
I
was like, that was around your time, right?
I was in 06 to 12. He was in what, 98?
So he was 98. He was
2000 or something. Yeah.
And when you went in, they kicked your butt.
Yeah.
So you're saying that in that situation, they would have kicked his butt. So he would have came in this big oaky guy from the countryman,
right.
and he would have been, picking rocks. That would have pissed anybody off, by the way.
Well, and then the military does an amazing thing called corporal punishment, whereas, like what you're saying, somebody has contraband or someone disobeys the rules, they punish everybody. If you're working a shift at McDonald's, the person that shows up late, they don't punish the whole shift, that's trying to do their job. They just fire the person that showed up late, Yeah, but the military is corporal punishment, and so they expect you to initiate justice within the platoon, and so, that's where you'd have sock parties or wall-to-wall counseling is what we called it, and, you'd force, you'd straighten your act.
I get you.
Because you didn't want it to happen again.
And
I've never participated in those sort of group events in my life. So I just am like, wow, that's some crazy shit you guys go through and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I was always
it's like a micro social economy.
I'm not allowed to say that. I'm probably going to get hunted down for saying that, but
no, it's just having an understanding of what Keys went through in the military, what he went through in his background, could really have a structure toward why he did the things he did.
No, and then especially like when you're going through like basic training or you first report to your units, you're low in rank, so you make jack shit for money as a private within the barracks, and so a lot of times the NCOs will have, which are like the sergeants and up. Sometimes they'll have a little bit of mercy because you're going to fuck up. You're a new soldier, like big or small, somehow you're going to fuck up. And what they'll do is, well, the ones that I had, they'd be like, okay, do you want me to take your time or take your money? Because you'll UCMJ, you get Article 15, you have to do hard labor and you lose your paycheck for however long, depending on the offense. Well, they'll give you an opportunity like your time where you'll just get like extra smoked or have to do like terrible things, to really run that lesson home, but you still get to keep your paycheck. Mm-hmm. So they kind of let the soldier choose at that point.
Wow.
So in this particular story, apparently, per witnesses, this guy who had the problem with Keys punched him in the face, which pissed Keys, which, obviously you're going to get punched in the face, which pissed him off to the point where he went like full Hulk mode and like lost it on this guy and started beating the ever-living shit out of him, like knocked him to the ground, got on top of him and started just pounding the Christ out of him to the point where other soldiers had to pull him off and like take him to another room or something. So those are the two outbursts of violence documented in Keys' life. Another strange incident, which I could not find the exact time other than that it was in Egypt. Apparently him and a bunch of buddies went out into wherever they were stationed, whatever city or whatever, and decided to get prostitutes. And this particularly because Keys had never, had somehow admitted that he'd never been with a prostitute. Unknown at this point if he'd even been with anyone. So they take him out. It's probably, I think, 8 to 10 of them, and they're all getting prostitutes and doing drugs. So they get a prostitute for Keys. She takes him in another room. They're like doing their thing in the other room, and then she comes storming out, yelling and screaming, and leaves. Keys tries to stop her and take her back and like say, no, come back. And she says, fuck you, I'm out. And she literally leaves without being paid. And so all of the soldiers were like, what the fuck did you do to make her leave without getting paid? And he just wouldn't talk about it. So that was another strange incident reported during his time in the military.
Interesting.
But there's not a lot. So unknown whatever happened there, but that was maybe his first attempt. Who knows?
A little glimpse into the
And
future.
I'm going to let Bret take over from here. I've talked way too much about all that because I spent so much time digging it up.
No, that's
Well,
Yeah, definitely a
now
glimpse.
it's good.
we're going to get now into his personal life and methodology. Following his discharge from the United States Army in 2001, Israel Keys would move to Nia Bay, a small community right on the northwestern tip of Washington State. Nia Bay is a small fish community right on the edge of Washington State. Right across the bay lays Vancouver Island, leaving it right at the border between the continental United States and Canada. Comprised of a predominant Native American population, Israel Keys would have stuck out like a sore thumb, but he soon found himself becoming a productive citizen of Nia Bay. In the small town of 800 or so people, Keys began to work for the Maka tribe. Maka. Thank you. As a landscaper, a construction worker, a handyman, just about everything a jack of all trades could be expected to be. Many of his fellow Nia Bay residents never recalled anything suspicious about him, seeing him as just another capable member of society that they could count on to fix just about anything, and who seemed to be a likable guy that everyone remembered as having a good sense of humor. So, seems pretty calm for now. Shortly after moving to Nia Bay, Israel had himself a girlfriend, a great role in society, and shortly afterwards, a daughter. While being a father didn't deter Israel from committing any of his future heinous crimes, it did deter him from targeting children. He would later go on to make it a point to target victims that didn't have any children present, which we can surmise as being part of his criminal code. Keys would go on to admit murdering his first victim at some point between July and October of 2001. We do not know the identity or location of this victim, but this is when the FBI believes Israel Keys began his killing spree. So, yeah, right out of the military, he just goes right into this.
But then again, he supposedly had a victim in 98. So conflicting reports, which we are going to try to dig through a little bit later.
And then the FBI interviews are just painful to listen to.
So painful.
Keys started his own construction company in Alaska, which soon became his quote-unquote base, from which he ventured out to nearly every region of the United States and abroad to commit murders. To help him commit these murders, he would bury kill kits in the areas where he planned to commit his murders. These kits were plastic containers filled with weapons, money, and useful tools to kill and discard the victims' bodies near his targeted area. Even though he had his construction business, he would not use his money he had earned from it to pay for the items or the trips related to the murders. Instead, he would utilize the money he received from robbing banks during his journeys across the nation. Wow. That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
Everything he bought was paid for with cash. He would purposely remove his cell phone's battery to lessen the chance of being tracked. He never committed murders in the same town twice and would kill far from home. One major detail that distinguished him from other serial killers was that he did not have a victim profile. He preyed on both men and women of all ages during broad daylight and at night. So this guy's like an ultimate predator hunter. Like,
he thinks so. He sure thinks so. I have my doubts, but
Keys would bury planned murder kits in these random places and took extra caution to avoid being detected. He would search for his victims in parks, campgrounds, walking trails, boating areas, cemeteries, and remote areas, and took into consideration if they had an attached garage, any children, cars in the driveway, or dogs when targeting a home. After each murder, he would flee the area immediately.
Let me just add in there that he specifically states in interviews later on that he would not target a home that had a detached garage because he liked to enter through the garage because it's usually unsecured or easier to break into. Just literally
Smart.
was just picking these places at random because of those small details such as a garage or no garage.
I mean, but would that be a profile then? Like, if that's what he's looking for?
A little
Well, it's a
bit,
smart
but
plan.
nothing that they pinpointed because they didn't even know they had a serial killer on their hands at all until a case we'll describe later.
Well, because and he would always just go across county and state lines too, which would make this more difficult for multi-agencies. You know,
Correct.
Keyes never had any previous connections with his victims, which made everything easier for him, since nobody would be able to recognize him. He would study the work of other serial killers and always tried to be better than them. Out of all the people he'd read about, he admired Ted Bundy, and he had plenty of similarities to him. They were both methodical, intelligent, and delighted in having possession over their victims. But despite their similarities, they had differences. Bundy's murders were throughout the country because he would reside in different areas, but they were not as intentional as in the case of Keyes, and unlike most serial killers, he pulled back from the spotlight. Between the years 2006 and 2008, Keyes traveled to Mexico and visited a plastic surgery clinic and other clinics to get dental work, a gastric band, laser hair removal. He also had his fingerprints modified. Keyes' family never believed in doctors or conventional medicine, which made investigators wonder why Keyes scheduled them and kept his family in the dark about them. So he got the gastric band. Like, was he getting overweight? I thought he was a skinny, wiry guy, like pretty fit. Like,
230, really.
That's kind of odd, isn't it?
So
6'1",
we believe
6'2".
It's essentially believed that he was attempting to biohack his body so that he wouldn't need to eat or relieve himself during these long international road trips while he was killing people.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah, because
like
he was essentially, that's the belief. Unknown for sure, but there was, so, and I'll read the next part because it kind of goes into that, but, so this was kind of the same kind of questions that the FBI was asking after they found out about these surgeries. So they asked numerous questions to his fellow soldiers, like the ones that we talked about earlier, with one in need of being answered, what was his physical appearance back then, to try to find out if he had modified his physical appearance, right? So each man described that Keyes always stood out in several ways. His sheer size. When standing, he stood between 6'2" and 6'4". He was built like a rock, 230 pounds of muscle, and they all say he had a huge nose. His physical appearance at the time of his apprehension was identical to that description, which seemed to indicate that whatever he'd done to modify his body during plastic surgery, it had not been to alter his physical appearance. So again, the belief is that he was attempting to hack his body in some kind of way to allow him to travel more efficiently, basically. Either not need to eat as much or as often, or maybe not to have to relieve himself as often.
Wow.
And one of the little notes I found, right.
That's dedication.
Wow. I mean, yeah, like that's highly intelligent behavior. That's incredible dedication. And that definitely is a game plan for the rest of your life, future-wise. Like, wow.
And he
100%.
also, I see that he shopped with the budget. Like he went for the cheapest.
Went to Mexico. He's like, let's go to Mexico. It's less expensive there.
You know,
Which, living in California, I can
it's
tell you, it
difficult
is less
to-
expensive there.
It is. It's difficult to kind of sum this up, but they talk about his international travels quite a bit. And when you start to look at, as a big picture, his travel methodology and records of when he is where at what time, border crossings everywhere should be just fucking ashamed. Because there are so many instances where this man had records of going into like Mexico or Canada or somewhere. And then, like 4 days later, he's checking into a hotel in the continental U.S. without any record of ever having crossed back. Like, there's constant issues.
Really?
Yes. Where there's just simply lost records, or maybe he somehow subverted a crossing or got in some other way. He takes great care at all times to obscure records of his movements, and then there's times when he specifically tries to place himself in certain places by turning his cell phone on in certain places and turning it off. Yes, A-aron.
That was, what'd you say, early 2000s, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So, I mean, you're looking at heavy border security at this point for the United States on both sides of the scale. I can tell you the Mexican border is hours to get through. It's can be extensive if they question you at all, like it can be.
Well,
So, I mean, for him not having any records of him coming back in is really weird.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Post 9/11,
right.
that was kind of where I was going with it. Like
lockdown, the country is being on lockdown. Like we're going to war. Like
me and you have done some traveling just in the past few years, and I mean, just airports alone are line security, dogs, the whole 9 yards.
And that's from the Patriot Act of post 9/11. I mean, so like you can only imagine the borders immediately after that.
So I'm sorry, I'm just finding it a bit weird or questionable at all. Like, how did he get back? If he's got records going out but not coming in, like how did he get back, and why would he not just come back over the border? He's a United States citizen. That wouldn't have been a problem.
Great question. What a great fucking question that is. And this is a pattern of his, if patterns there are, where he, again, goes to sometimes really elaborate lengths to obscure his travel records. Or again,
like
there's times
said about the battery, like turn it on in a certain location and turn back off, make it look like he was in another state the whole time.
Which is really interesting because then later on he does also display some very strange ignorance of some very basic things, which we'll get into. But one of the interesting things during this early time period was he actually put in an application to be a police officer at one point in Nia Bay, Washington. Unknown what the reason was that he wasn't hired, whether it was, how far he got in the hiring process, whether he withdrew his application. But when asked later on by the FBI why he did that, they're like, he told them, he's like, who would ever suspect a cop? Like he literally was thinking about ways to be a better killer.
Now, question,
for sure this guy was very intelligent.
Is that confirmed that he actually did apply, or is that just him saying it?
No, he did be the chief of police of Nia Bay, was the one who told the FBI
confirmed.
that.
Okay,
they then
so
asked
it is
him
confirmed
about
that he actually applied. Again, another intelligent move for a very long future.
Correct.
So this guy's a wolf among sheep, like
for sure. And we'll get into that later, but it's interesting because they had actually asked the police in Nia Bay when they were investigating him initially. They're like, "Hey, did he have any did you ever respond to his address for violent altercations?" And they're like, "Yeah, we totally did one time. His girlfriend tried to beat the shit out of him, but he wouldn't fight back." So literally that was their violent altercation, was where she got violent and he wouldn't do anything. And then the police chief actually said when having that conversation, "Oh, he also put in an application here, by the way," which is how they found out about that.
And
just
and I know we're about to
get
into this,
by the way.
But Huevos Grande, he has money, but he's going and robbing banks and timing police responses, and that's
we'll
insane.
get into the psychology of that as well. Believe it or not, he robbed banks as a way to come down from the adrenaline high of murder. That was his relaxation.
Well, I've never murdered anybody, but I can imagine the adrenaline is very high.
He would get himself worked up and he needed a way to calm down. So he'd go rob a bank.
Yeah. Ooh, okay.
So there's so much here. So in 2001, so again, Keyes later told the authorities he began his killing spree in 2001 in earnest. Whatever the fuck that means. Now he got serious.
Did you say 98?
Went from a hobby to a profession.
Did you say 98 was the first kill?
He originally
first crime. That was his first crime that we know.
I believe we're going to get into that later on, but he told the police not the police, but the FBI repeatedly in interviews, "I didn't start anything until after the military, so in 2001. So he was building this timeline, and then he later on did admit to earlier crimes. So we believe there was one in 98, and I personally believe they were probably much earlier than that. But in 2001 was when he started really ramping up and beginning this system and pattern of murders and bank robberies.
Well, and he was also breaking into homes with his sister, right? And neighbors and stuff.
As a kid, yes.
Yeah, so he already had this pattern of doing things like this. So I don't think it stopped.
But the parents were just like, go return stuff. So one thing I didn't mention about his early childhood is, again, one time after an argument with his father as a teenager, Israel said, "Fuck you guys, I'm running away." So he like went off into the woods a short distance and built himself his own cabin
Wow.
by hand. And then he continued, when they talk about his cache of stolen guns, that's where the parents found the cache of stolen guns, was in the little cabin he'd built himself as an act of rebellion. So he was now escalating to like another level of criminal activity at that time. Yes.
So he was doing the cache of weapons well before military. That wasn't something he learned in the military. That was something he figured out as a child, that he could bury something. Very
Correct.
Born identity.
His dad liked guns. Shit. He grew up shooting guns.
Okay.
There was always guns in the family.
Well, white supremacist church, like
he actually was very proud of himself as a kid, as in those teenage years. He took this point of pride that he could disassemble and modify weapons, which pretty bold move to be telling this to the fucking feds. Like, I was totally standing off lower receivers. What are you talking?
But the fact that he was able to do
there's a felony.
Oh, quite a few. But he could do them before he ever had military training. He was very proud of it. This was the stuff he learned as a kid. Like, wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And, the white supremacist neighborhood probably did not help at all. But
no. Don't they have training programs for kids? I just pissed a whole lot of people off.
90% sure they do.
Well, and you know what? I don't know if there's something with Washington. I've been up there a few times for work. I remember we once had a soldier. I won't say his name, but he came from Washington State, and I believe he came from the eastern side of Washington, where it's more farmland, because he grew up kind of like on the farmland, more rural area. And I don't think this kid was trying to be racist, or he was trying not to be racist, but it was really, he'd never seen a black person or African American before he joined the military. And like he was just in confusion or on awe, and he would just stare at them and ask them weird questions, and it was really strange. And the story just kind of reminded me of this guy being in Washington. It just kind of brought that back to me. And it was really trippy. Like, what do you mean you've never? He's like, no. He's like, I've never seen anybody with a different skin color than ours.
I can imagine.
And he was just like amazed.
Yeah.
For your first, he's like, I've seen movies, or he's like, when I did get to see movies, I'd read it in books. He's like, but this like face to face interaction with somebody, it was just, he was like starstruck. It was just crazy.
So he told them that he had these victims of opportunity, that he targeted random people all over the country with no real premeditated plan, which is true. He spent a lot of time. God, I feel like I'm suddenly relating to this guy in a weird way. Like I'm also like a fucking Boy Scout. Like I like to be prepared for anything. You know what I mean? Like got everything ready, but like no plan. That's how he was. He would have the kill kits, yes, and the general paranoia and over planning, but not a single specific victim in mind. So this was so he could avoid detection, which was also part of the plan. Keyes had the murder kits that we talked about. He had one hard and fast rule about not killing children. Sorry, it's got a little repetitive, but this is because he had a daughter of his own now, so now he's not going to do that.
And that makes sense. Being a parent,
I don't know.
That definitely makes sense. Totally logical to kill people.
To me, that lends.
Children.
I personally believe, I'm going to insert a little personal psychology here, that him having his own daughter had nothing to do with it, because I don't believe he has a conscience or the ability to care about anyone besides himself. I believe that this is an unaddressed act of rebellion against his father, who probably was extremely abusive to him and his siblings. That's my belief here.
So you don't believe at all that his child and his lady who had a child is reference. He can be, because wow, that's really interesting, because as a parent, and Bret could probably relate, like it's a different ball game. It's almost like it's hardwired in your brain as a person that could be instinctually a reason why to be, hey, don't kill women and children. You have children.
I agree with you for a normal person, but I firmly believe Israel Keyes is a textbook psychopath, which means he has no ability to experience emotions the way that you and I do, which is why he's so confusing to so many people, is because as normal people, asking yourself, how could this person do this thing? It doesn't make sense. If you then turn it and say, how could a psychopath with no conscience and no emotions do this thing? It suddenly starts to make sense. And I believe the whole thing about caring about his daughter and girlfriend is just part of this persona that he's built in which he cares about his daughter and girlfriend. Brett, go ahead.
Wow. Okay.
So for his daughter and girlfriend, he's looking around trying to see, okay, what's normal? How do I fit in? Okay,
Correct.
someone my age, this would be normal to do and, blend in. Just like becoming a cop, who would suspect it. Having a girlfriend and a daughter, who would suspect
Correct.
that versus just being the loner. It's looking around and seeing, being intelligent, hyper intelligent at a certain level. Like, hey, this is fitting in, this is normalcy, and this will help me fly under the radar.
So if you look at his decisions and the things that he does, you can see the effect of rebellion against his father and upbringing way more than you can see the effect of human emotion. For example, the woman that he had a child with from the Maka tribe, she was Native American and black mixed. You can imagine that is a giant FU to his father. So he met her on like a phone text line or something, started dating her, and within 2 months she was pregnant. And he initially said he wanted nothing to do with the kid. He then later changed his mind. Now, why do you think he would do that? Because he's building a persona of someone who is not to be suspected. He says, a kid will actually help this. I don't want a kid. I don't care about a kid, and I don't care about her. But this is going to look good for me as I'm trying to build this veneer of a life. So he ends up dating somebody else and getting custody of his daughter. I'll shorten that into that. There's some baby mama drama there. And then he moved with that woman to to Anchorage, Alaska later on. From Nia Bay to Alaska. So I believe that he has no actual legitimate, as you and I would know it, strong emotion attached to his daughter or to his girlfriend / ex-wife. I believe he has worked extremely hard to put this persona in place of someone who does care about those things. And he must maintain that. It becomes almost a compulsion for him to work very hard to maintain these separate personas he builds. I believe
hiding in plain sight.
That his refusal to hurt children, I did not hear this anywhere. This is just a personal theory as something that I've done research, because people have so many questions about this guy. How could he do this? How could he do this? And I'm coming from the psychology point of view where I think that he's a psychopath. I don't believe his own claims that he's doing this or that for my kid. So why is he doing it? And we see the things that he does do that are in direct rebellion, such as joining the army, the physically branding himself, his interest in Satanism, dating someone who isn't white. All these things that he does are affected more by his father than what we call any real emotion. It's a giant fuck you to his dad and to the psycho-religious upbringing. So I firmly believe that not hurting kids is probably a result of him and his siblings being heavily abused physically by their father.
Wow.
So your theory is it's psychopathy and childhood trauma combined.
Well, yeah, they're often combined, but in this case, I believe you can see clearly that they're combined, because childhood trauma doesn't make you torture cats, right? That was
that's more. That's more written in who you are as
mental.
a person. Yeah.
That is nature.
But I mean, that's some
not
pretty
nurture.
high. That's some pretty high staging planning. Maybe getting her pregnant obviously was probably an accident, but to plan on that level, I mean, the intelligence. This to me, it's starting to really sound like kind of like a spy thing, like the whole double life, creating a spy, but your spy is a killer.
I think he saw himself that way.
Wow. So he saw himself playing chess when everybody's playing checkers. Like,
correct.
Well,
he loved that too.
They say there's a fine line between intelligence and insanity. So I think he's definitely riding that line.
And if you think about it, a lot of the things that he does, he's very methodical, organized, logical. He's planning for a long-term career in murder. He's not making impulsive. Sometimes, I mean, in a way, there are some impulsive moments where I'm picking that person to kill right now. But that's also part of his pre-planned thing. Like, he plans to do that. He plans to go find a random victim.
Well, and then he probably got off from the Serenity.
Yeah, what you're up to in the outline, we're still on the, he's still methodical. That hasn't changed.
True. I'm sorry. I'm probably jumping ahead.
No. I'm not trying to be that guy. Just saying, like, he's still in a very methodical, trained point of view, from childhood to military to starting this out in, okay, I'm going to start doing what I do. Yeah, the murder kit thing is wild, just the cachet concept. But and there are a lot still out there. This guy's smart, like,
that have not been recovered.
If this is all true, he's smart, very smart.
So what we've talked about so far is, again, it's testimony blended from witnesses as well as Israel Keyes himself. And he was not very forthcoming with a lot of information. This shit was like pulling teeth watching his interviews, but still talking about his methodology a bit. It says, but by no means was Israel Keyes showing any sort of mercy towards his victims, despite not targeting children. After deciding in his teenage years that he would rape and kill a woman and get away with it, that early crime we talked about, Keyes went on to kill as few as 3 and as many as 11 people between 2001 and 2012. And then some quotes from the detective on the case, the Koenig case. He was very confident in the fact that he was successful in leading this kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde lifestyle, and that no one would ever suspect him of doing these crimes had he not confessed. So as a killer, he was remorseless and made it clear that he liked to kill. Israel Keyes never expressed in any way, shape, or form that he was ashamed or regretted any of his actions, and he was very self-aware. He was also very okay with the fact that he did this because he got enjoyment out of it. He didn't try to rationalize it at any time. Keyes also told agents he had weighed down at least one body with anchors and dumped it from a boat into 100 feet of water in Lake Crescent, 18 miles west of Port Angeles. Hard to get into that later because you're never going to recover a body from that lake. In general, it's like 700 feet deep or something. And I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but Samantha Koenig, which is his most high-profile case and the one that led to his capture, is the only body out of, I want to say, I believe they're up to like 4 at least confirmed now, of his that has ever been recovered. So we're going to talk now, finally, about one of his victims, which is our unknown victim number 1. And this was one of the many stories. Go ahead, Bret.
Because like you were saying, I'm sure we'll cover later, that Samantha Koenig is the one that everybody knows about because that was the body that was found. Whereas these other bodies weren't found, but these people that went missing or disappeared, they were tied to like him being in the area or like being in the
Correct.
Geographical locale.
Well, between his own admissions and evidence and other things, we're going to go into that highly in detail here in a bit, but he was very good at disposing of bodies. Very, very good, to the point where they haven't been fucking recovered. And many probably never will, or if they are, they may not be tied to him. And the reason that his case has so much information to it is because of how many rabbit trails you could follow as you track his movements throughout the world, actually. And all the places where people went missing in times when he was in an area. And during these trips, he would put stupid miles on his rental cars. And so you knew he wasn't just going for work. Like, there was times when he put upwards of 2,000 miles on a rental car in a 3-day trip in a local area and returned it to the same area.
So that answers the gastric ban from Mexico. Yeah. Like if you're doing that kind of driving.
The biohack stuff, yeah.
And then his reports later of what he was doing, where he was, what he was up to, don't match up with, you pick up the car with this many miles and you return it with 1,800 miles more on it. Like, that doesn't account for your, where you said you were and what you said you were doing during this time. And unfortunately, we may never know the answers to some of those, but there's a lot of like internet sleuthing happening where people are trying to match up missing people in those areas and try to pin down some more of his victims. But I am going to let Bret, I'm going to let A-aron take our unknown victim number 1. It's time for you to waste some breath.
Number 1. I love wasting breath. All right. In his teenage years, there we go. In his teenage years, Keyes fully renounced the Christian faith, which led to a schism between him and his father. 97 or 98, the family moved to Maupin, a high desert town along the Deschutes River in Central Oregon, where his brothers helped their dad build a house. In an interview with the FBI investigators, Keyes said that he had, by his late teenage years, decided he could rape or kill and get away with it. He was also interested in Satanism at the time and began to plan a sacrifice ritual killing involving a young woman. The area where Keyes was working was a popular place for inner tubers to float down the Deschutes River and probably destroying that name. Keyes told investigators that
I don't fucking know.
Keyes told investigators that one day he stood on a beach along the river, waded out, and grabbed a woman who was last in her group of tubers, a teenage girl, sandy blonde hair. He dragged her to a remote campground bathroom, tied her up with ropes, and raped her. He said, Keyes planned to strangle the girl and dump her body into the toilet pit where he thought it wouldn't be discovered for a long time. He had knives with him to use for a satanic ritual. The girl was a teenager, maybe between the ages of 14 and 18. She was really scared. She kept saying she wasn't going to tell anybody. He told her to shut up before she kept talking, he told the investigators. She was pretty smart, and it worked, he said. Things never got really violent like they could have if she had been fighting me. So he ended up letting her go. I was too timid, he told the investigators. I wasn't violent enough yet. I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again. He was never charged with a crime, and it's unclear if the investigators ever located the victim.
Damn.
Ooh. Yeah. So that's a really heartbreaking one.
Well, this is before the military, like. Yeah. So this is just a lifestyle for him, you know. Like,
he hasn't figured out how to kill yet on a level of a person. Cats are different.
I actually believe that he fully intended to kill her, but she saved herself essentially because, as we'll learn later on, Israel Keyes is a sexually motivated serial killer, which is very rare. And what he gets off on essentially is his victims' terror and fear and surprising them. This victim, by his own accounts, which I didn't put it all in here, but she stayed calm. And he told investigators later that he thinks that either something like this had happened to her before, or she had thought about what she would do in this scenario because she stayed calm. She told him he was an attractive guy. You don't have to do this because I would have gone out with you if you just asked. And making comments like that to him.
Killed the vibe for him. Killed the whole...
Well, she killed the vibe.
In the law enforcement side, your side there, don't they have training in that kind of stuff for women on things to do in these situations? I hate the fact that we live in a society that a woman has to think that way, period, every day. Guys are dicks. But don't they have training and stuff for that? Yeah, don't they have training and stuff for that for women to learn? So maybe she had gone through some of that, just a possible there. But
it's possible. Wow, I don't know if they had that in 98.
She's very,
but
touche.
She was very smart, and either she had some kind of like psychic ability to know what to say to this guy, or she had been in this situation before, which is sad. I also thought it was really frustrating that Keyes made this huge point to investigators that he didn't hurt children, but he pointed out her age as a range between 14 to 18, which tells you she was a fucking child when he took her.
Well, maybe
he was almost 20, I think.
On the reference point of his daughter was why he didn't kill children. If he was doing this stuff before he had a daughter, maybe that rule didn't apply until the daughter came down the way. Either way.
Right.
Lucky girl.
But I mean, he goes out of his way to kind of take the moral high ground at times, and then he does things like this where he talks about it like, and again, he wasn't really interested in Satanism at any point. He was pursuing that as a polar opposite. Correct. Literally as a like trying to go as far from his own.
Is there any proof of this story other than his statements? Okay.
None.
They never found the girl. There's never been a report of this girl being raped. Like she went and reported it afterwards. Nothing.
She never reported it. Israel's claimed that himself, that she never reported it because he kind of worried that maybe somebody was going to come talk to him, but nobody did.
But there's also a lot of stigma and shame, and a lot of rape victims don't come forward or don't come forward in time.
Of course.
The vast majority of rape victims do not come forward. And if you've ever been around when your buddy has made a rape joke, that's exactly why they don't come forward. Because of those jokes. Because somebody around you has been a victim, and they are listening to you make those jokes. So they're not funny, you don't make those jokes because someone close to you is listening to see how you'd react, and they're hearing that you don't take it seriously. So you might think it's you don't need to make that joke.
I agree with you completely. I don't care how good of a comedian you are. Like rape and joke, they're not in the same phrase.
Murderers, child molesters, and rapists are on my are on my ultimate list that I'll spend night in jail over.
Yeah. So believe it or not, his crimes get so much worse. So much worse. So this is where it gets murky, though. In addition to his confirmed victims, who we'll discuss next, Keyes claimed he took at least 5 other lives, but never named these victims. Per his account, he killed 4 people in Washington state, a couple sometime between 01 and 05, and 2 separate victims in 05 and 06. Keyes also stated that in 09, he murdered someone on the East Coast, then left the body in New York State. The FBI is now relatively confident. I believe they've actually progressed to fully confirm that this victim was Deborah Feldman, a New Jersey resident who went missing in April 2009. This is where it gets really sad for a minute. Speculation about other possible Keyes victims has included a girl named Julie Harris, who disappeared in Colville in 1996. Her prosthetic feet were found a month after she vanished, and her remains came to light in 1997. Keyes was in the area when Harris went missing, but denied any involvement. Julie Harris was a Special Olympian who had won gold in something in the Special Olympics. And she had 2 prosthetic legs. And he, there's a 98% chance that she was maybe his first victim. He's also been posited.
I was going to say, he's saying that he had nothing to do with it, though, right? He denied any
claims.
Involvement. So he's going to tell you these stories about the people that he killed, but then he's going to deny involvement in something that they speculate he might have been involved in. Why would you do that?
Constantly. Because
it could be shame because she's disabled, or
it's shame regularly in a situation where he feels like, for example, this was a child, obviously, so he doesn't like to admit to even the 98 thing, right? And then finally,
Well, does
a psychopath feel shame? If a psychopath doesn't feel empathy for his own daughter, does a psychopath feel shame?
Here's where he feels shame. He's ashamed of situations where he felt like he messed up or botched it, or he was embarrassed by things going wrong.
Or losing control.
He wasn't good enough.
When he doesn't feel that it went the way that he wanted it to go, or that he saw himself making mistakes, he did not like to admit to those things.
Well, I've all seen the nature documentary where the lions or the cheetahs, they're following, the herd, and they're preying on the weak or the ones that are or the young, they're kind of trailing behind. Somebody with 2 prosthetic feet or whatever, that kind of person, may not be able to get away, or you can disable them easier. That'd be an easy first target, or easier maybe in his mind. The speculation.
And it's regularly, it's very common for serial killers to start their career by quote unquote practicing. Kind of like you mentioned, those stragglers at the back of the herd, oftentimes sex workers, people. Frequently, this is what happens: is they get these ideas and they want to do these things, but then what about if I get caught? What about police? What if someone reports them missing? Prostitutes are a really easy target. That's why a lot of
transients.
They believe that they won't be missed by the police, so that they go after those people who are sex workers, who are on the fringes or in their minds, less likely to be missed quickly. Same thing with abducting a child. So serial killers might go after a kid because physically they're going to overpower that person. It's going to be a very high success rate versus struggling with a full-grown adult, especially if they're just working out their own technique and how they want to do things. So,
like a test run.
We're going to talk a little bit more about Deborah Feldman, as that's a good segue into this, because she was known all her life to have a serious issue with drugs and alcohol, and even her family wouldn't have been surprised to find out that she had likely been moonlighting as a prostitute before her disappearance. They have linked this disappearance of Deborah Feldman to Keyes, not only through happenstance, but by the near admission of Keyes. There's times when he... Let me see if I even put this. Okay, yeah. While being interrogated by the FBI, Keyes was shown photos of many of the missing men and women from the states he had visited in the hopes that he would identify some just to bring the families closure. That never really worked, but he gestured no to most of the photos. But when he was shown a picture of Deborah Feldman, he paused. His response to the photo may be the only closure the family of Deborah Feldman will ever receive. "I'm not ready to talk about her," he said, before dropping the subject forever. He's also said he next intended to leave Alaska and travel through storm-ravaged regions to find new victims while working as a contractor. He dreamt of later building a house where he could imprison his victims. That was his long-term retirement plan.
Okay, so to clarify, the only connection they have to him, other than his story, is the comment he made of a photo of someone who disappeared around the time he was in that area.
I believe they have more now. They've pinned down his travel records.
They did confirm it.
I read, because so many of these sources are from varying progressions of the FBI's investigation. Some articles are from the start, Some articles are from years later. The most recent article I found on Deborah Feldman says that the FBI has now confirmed her as a Israel Keys victim. But at the time this was written, parts of this was written, they were still only investigating it.
Got it.
So I don't know what's come to light, but they supposedly, yeah.
Well, that's good.
But he did show a strong response to her photo in the interview, because they were trying every tactic possible to get him to talk, to play on his conscience. Don't you want to bring these guys closure? You know, and of course, all of it. He doesn't give a fuck about giving anyone closure. Like, he was out for himself, and we'll get into his interviews later. But I think this might be a good spot to wrap up episode 1. Next, we'll get into the very grisly details of the murder of Bill and Lorraine Currier, and of course, Samantha Koenig, and the apprehension of Israel Keys, the motherfucker.
This is some heavy shit.
Yeah, agreed.
It gets darker. Maybe we should do a disclaimer at the...
Yeah, this gets darker.
We should probably do a disclaimer.
Ladies and gentlemen, this gets darker and darker.
What do you think, guys? Stop it there and start part 2?
Yeah. I mean, we're hour and 20 into this, and I mean,
everybody take a breather, kind of absorb this. Yeah, kind of bring it in on how intelligent this guy was, and possibly methodical.
And if you're not intrigued yet,
and then how he gets caught on almost what feels like a rookie mistake, which will be later down the road, you know, on the next episode.
He makes so many mistakes. I believe. I'll posit my theory here for your consideration. That at the end of 2011, about December, we start to see a sharp downward spiral of Israel Keys, where this methodical robot killing machine bit starts to almost disintegrate. And he starts making mistake after mistake after mistake, and eventually will lead to his capture and interrogation, which is where we've gained most of this information we've already talked about. My theory is something happened in that time period that led him to spiral downwards rapidly and commit these crimes that he would get caught for. I think his brain either fucking fractured. Something happened.
I have some definite questions on that part of the show. So,
excellent. Questions. All right. We're going to skip forward to them and save it for the end of this two-part, maybe 3-part. Who knows? Let's roll with it and see what happens. Yeah.
Kick ass.
I thought we were halfway through. We're like a quarter way through this outline.
So this doesn't leave on such like a shitty, sad like note. What's a movie or a show either you've been watching or the last show you're watching that you're just like obsessed with, or something that's really good that you'd recommend to our listeners or viewers, or you think they should be watching as well?
All right.
Some positive in the song.
Ladies first, Clouds. Ladies first.
Okay, I'm so ashamed to admit this, but I've been on Rick and Morty like crack cocaine. I think I've already watched it through like 4 times, and now in the last 2 weeks, I've watched it through another 2 times. I don't know why. It's literally like crack to me. I don't know what is wrong with me, but if you can't get enough of Rick and Morty, guys, there is another show on Hulu called Solar Opposites by the same creators that is maybe not equally as good, but it's a nice little Band-Aid on the wound of no new Rick and Morty seasons. It's adult animation, very adult animation, but I actually love it. It's about aliens who crash landed on Earth and they have to figure out how to live here, and there's a whole... It's fucking funny. It's vulgar.
Was the Earth a globe or flat in the animation?
Turns out it was round. Wow.
So
their planet exploded. So their planet explodes Superman style, which is also round, and they crash landed on Earth trying to find a new planet to terraform for their alien life species, and it's just a fucking disaster the whole way through. I love it. I'm obsessed with it.
Sounds like a great show.
Solar Opposites on Hulu. So good. Nice. Aaron, what about you?
Actually, I just wrapped up Orville. I don't know if you guys are into Seth MacFarlane, Family Guy, all that stuff.
Nice. Yes.
Orville, I got to admit, it started out as this parody that was funny, and as you get more into it, I have to agree with some of the articles I've read about it too, where it handles topics in our society a hell of a lot better than Star Trek ever did. And again, I love Star Trek, love Star Wars, for those of you who know me, again. But Orville, man, like they had it up on one of the streaming services. I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. Paramount Plus? No, I don't remember which one. Disney. Disney. There you go, Disney Plus. And I got super absorbed into it. I've seen the first 2 seasons. I watched the first 2 seasons again, and then I watched the 3rd season. So shout out to Seth MacFarlane. Holy shit, dude! You did something with this show that you didn't even do with Family Guy. You really touched on some very serious topics in a very sci-fi, fun, and entertaining way. I absolutely love it.
I'll have to give it a shot because I thought it was just like a goofy, stupid comedy. Like, I'd never had any interest in it.
It does start out like that in the first season, and it does there are points in the seriousness that are absolutely hilarious, but you have to think of like Seth MacFarlane comedy. He got an opportunity to get more serious with it with time. He definitely took it. Whoever has made those decisions. It's pretty good.
It's the same guy that makes Family Guy and American Dad, so I mean...
Yeah. And he's a pretty good actor, too. I got to give him credit. He's pretty funny.
For me, I've been starting to rewatch. I'm actually rewatching 2 shows. I'm going to cheat here saying 2 shows, but Parks and Recreation, rewatching that from the beginning. So seeing see some of the cast in there in the early years, and then I'm also started rewatching again my favorite show of all time. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the best show ever.
Show.
Start at the beginning and watch it straight through again. It's amazing. You're missing out. Very politically incorrect, but
I do love Parks and Rec.
Oh, yeah, Parks. Let's see, I can't stand The Office, and I know people are going to crucify me.
Oh, I love that.
Not like The Office. Like, I get the pranks, the prank wars. I'll watch YouTube little snippets of that. I can't get in The Office. I've tried.
All right, Bret
like 10
ruined
years
it.
in The Office. Mm-hmm. I like Parks and Rec, though. Like, Parks and Rec is funny.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get into this next week. But yeah, I wanted to end this on a little lighter note because that was
cool.
Stuff.
Check out good shows, folks.
That.
People need to be entertained, man. We all do sit at home sometimes.
And then if you hate all our selections, just give us some suggestions on the stuff you think we should watch.
Absolutely, please do. I would love some new shows. Something to put on the background while I read redacted FBI files by the hundreds of pages until my eyes melt out of my skull.
Oh, redacted files.
Dude, it's so annoying. And I already know the names. For example, like in the Koenig case, we know her father's name. So every place where they've like redacted his name is just so fucking annoying because we already know his name. Like, for the love of shit. Anyways, let's pick up next. Yeah, that's my problem. There's no OCD happening in my life whatsoever. It's just dedication, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to say goodbye for now and pick up in 30 seconds for part 2.
See you in part 2. Thank you, guys. Bye.